In today's video, I'm about to show you where Jesus clearly claimed to be God in the Bible. And by the end of today's video, I'm also going to give you an additional passage to use in line with this passage to make it even more emphatic. So this is the passage right here I want to talk about. This is in John chapter 8 verse 58. It's a famous passage where Jesus says, "Verily, verily, I say unto you, so truly, truly, I say unto you, before Abraham was, I am." Comparing John 8:58 to Exodus 3:14 in and of itself is not a bad thing. But like I said, there are people that try and worm their way out of this particular reference. And really and truly, when you do what I'm about to show you next, it makes it so much harder for someone to try and worm their way out of the force of what Jesus was saying in John 8:58. As we scroll up, I want you to have in mind Jesus saying in John 8:58, "Before Abraham was, I am." Now, Jesus says, "I know that ye are Abraham's seed, but ye seek to kill me, because my word hath no place in you." So Jesus is saying here quite clearly that you are physical descendants of Abraham, yes, but you are trying to kill me because God's word, my word, has no place in you. Now notice what he says next in verse 38. "I speak that which I have seen with my father, and you do that which ye have seen with your father." So although you are physical descendants of Abraham, Jesus is saying, you are actually taking part after the devil, not necessarily the God of Abraham. And he goes further and says in verse 39, "They answered and said unto him," notice this, "Abraham is our father." Jesus says unto them, "If you were Abraham's children, ye would do the works of Abraham." If you had my words in you, you would receive me, right? But notice what he says next, which is really vital. Let me scroll up and you can see here in verse 40, what does Jesus say? He says, "But now ye seek to kill me, a man that hath told you the truth." So I've told you the truth, which I have heard of God. This did not Abraham. Now, this is a very powerful passage, but I want you to understand, I'm going to ask you a question now, and I want you to think about this until the end of today's video. What is Jesus saying Abraham did not do in contrast to what these religious leaders are trying to do? Well, the next thing I want you to highlight, the conversation goes further. I definitely recommend you read this in your own time, but let's just for sake of time scroll down a couple of lines to closer to Jesus saying, "Before Abraham was, I am." And we can go to verse 51 where Jesus is saying, "Truly, truly, I say unto you, if a man keep my sayings, he shall never taste death." Now that's a big, bold statement to make by Jesus, and the religious leaders don't fail to miss it, because what did they say? "Then said the Jews unto him, Now we know that you have a devil." Notice this, Abraham, still of the point of the topic, is dead, and the prophets are dead, and you say, if a man keep your sayings, he shall never taste death. And what did they say? This is the key question here, which is vital to the context of Jesus claiming to be God in John 8:58. They ask him, "Are you greater than our father Abraham, who is dead, and the prophets who are dead? Who do you make yourself?" So they ask him three questions basically. Are you greater than Abraham? Are you greater than the prophets? And then who are you basically claiming to be? Let's scroll down a couple more lines, right? And what does he say in verse 56? "Your father Abraham rejoiced to see my day, and he saw and he was glad." Then notice what they say next based on what Jesus just said. "Then said the Jews unto him, You are not yet 50 years old, and you have seen Abraham?" Notice the question they're asking. And I have to credit this to the late Dr. Chuck Missler, who used to say this all the time. Always focus on what the religious leaders are saying, because it highlights things which Gentile readers typically tend to miss. Then Jesus says in verse 58, "Truly, truly, I say unto you, before Abraham was, I am." Now remember the question I asked you earlier in regards to verse 40. We can go back and notice what actually happens here. We go back to verse 40 and notice what Jesus actually did. Jesus says, "You are trying to kill me, a man that has told you the truth, which I have heard from God. This did not Abraham." So I asked you a question earlier. What is Jesus saying Abraham didn't do, which the religious leaders are doing? Well, the passage quite clearly tells you. They are trying to kill him because he's telling them the truth, which he heard from God, but Abraham didn't do this. Jesus came and told Abraham the truth that he heard from God, and Abraham did not try to kill him. So Jesus is claiming that he had visitation with Abraham, before him having this visitation with these religious leaders. Now we know this is actually quite clear because follow the answers, the argumentation the religious leaders are actually making. In 52, what did they say? We know you have a devil because Abraham is dead and the prophets are dead. And you say that anyone who hears your words and receives your words will never taste death. Then they ask him, are you greater than Abraham who's dead and the prophets which are dead? Who do you make yourself to be? Now notice what Jesus says. If it wasn't as clear as it should be for you already, he's just got finished talking about how Abraham did not try to kill him when Jesus brought him truth. Now in verse 55, verse 56, he says, Abraham was rejoicing to see his day, and he saw and he was glad. Now, what are the implications that Jesus is making from this particular verse? Not only did Abraham not try to kill him when he visited him, right, when he brought him truth from God, but secondly, Abraham saw the day and he was rejoicing and was glad to see Jesus' day come in the future. If you didn't get this already, the religious leaders make it even more emphatic and more clear for us. They say unto him, but Jesus, you're not only 50 years old yet, and you have seen Abraham? And what does Jesus say in response to this? No, I'm just talking spiritually, or you don't get what I'm saying. No, he goes even deeper and says, truly, truly, I say unto you, before Abraham was, I am. And is it a surprise after saying this, they then turn around to try and kill him again, which again links into John 8:40, where Jesus says, Abraham didn't try to kill me, but you are actually trying to kill me because I'm bringing you the truth. But when you look at these passages in context, really just looking at an additional 18 verses, you can see quite clearly the climax, how we got to this climactic position. The implications are that Abraham knows who Jesus is. And that's quite clear when Jesus says, before Abraham was, I am. Yes, he's linking back to Exodus 3:14, but he's going even deeper, going back all the way to Genesis. Now, the fact of the matter is, when you think about Genesis as a whole and Abraham, the only thing you see in regards to Abraham, for the most part, is God appearing to Abraham. And what does that mean Jesus is implying? Clearly that he is God who appeared to Abraham and brought him messaging about his coming entrance into the world. Now, I said in today's video, before we wrap up, I'm also going to show an additional passage which goes in line with this passage to make what we just talked about today, based on context, even more emphatic. This is John 12, verse 37 to 42. You can read the context and read this in your own time as well. But Jesus is here described as doing many miracles that the religious leaders, these people, were not able to see. And he quotes two passages from the prophet Isaiah, right? One from Isaiah 53, right, and one from Isaiah chapter 6. The flow of the narrative all the way through, before, right, and even after, is all talking about Jesus. But notice what he says in verse 41. John says, these things said Isaiah when he saw his glory and spake of him. Right after it says, nevertheless, among the chief rulers also many believed on him, speaking about Jesus, but because of the Pharisees, they did not confess, lest they should be put out of the synagogue. John here in John chapter 12 is going back to Isaiah chapter 6 and saying that the one that Isaiah saw was Jesus. Why is this a surprise if Jesus has already said in John chapter 8 that before Abraham was, I am, and Abraham was rejoicing to see my day? And if this isn't enough to convince you that Jesus is God, here's another video which does exactly that as well.